Welcome to the MLB Slate Breakdown. I'm Jason Gilbo. With me is Brent Hyden, taking a look at tonight's MLB Slate on FanDuel and DraftKings. A little bit of weather here sprinkled in throughout the slate. Going to need to keep an eye on it. It's windy and wet.
Yeah, it's kind of frustrating because it seems like every slate so far this year has had just a mass amount of weather concerns, and that continues tonight with rain in some of these games and pretty much wind blowing out everywhere else, and some really, really strong winds in a couple of these games, and it's going to lead to a decent amount of offense, I think, from both sides of these games tonight.
Yeah, I think so. I think, obviously we have, a couple pitching options that we can use here tonight. But yeah, going to be rather high scoring, especially this first game here, Baltimore and New York. This is an area where wind is blowing out to, what do you want to call these pitchers? Average?
I would say average to below average. I would like Sabathia at this point in his career, probably a little bit below average. Gossman is a guy that's had a lot of hype coming into the season, and I think the hype train came to a screeching halt in his first game. I don't think he's going to put up a solid outing here. He had some rather I'd say disturbing StatCast numbers in his first outing, giving up an average distance of almost 240 feet and average exit velocity of 90.4 miles per hour. Probably not going to play well in New York tonight with the wind blowing out like 15 miles per hour.
No, I don't think so here. You look at Gossman, last year, the lefties finally started to get to him. He was kind of more reverse splits. Obviously, that still number held against righties. 344 WOBA out to righties last year, 350 to lefties. I'm looking. This is going to be one of those things. I think this is going to be a thing on a nightly basis where it really is kind of 1 through 9 for the Yankees are in play. Like, I don't mind some of these bats. I even don't mind some of the back half bats, but looking to really load up on some of these guys. I think Gary Sanchez might be my favorite here of the grouping.
Yeah, there's a few guys that I really like here. Obviously, catcher, not the strongest of positions tonight. We'll talk about a few guys that could be in play, but given that Gary Sanchez is excellent against right-handed pitching, you could definitely make an argument for him. A ton of power, 239 ISO. Dating back to last season for him. He's not my favorite option from as far as the bats go. I think I prefer Didi Gregorius here, strictly because one is his batting order. He's projected to bat cleanup. Obviously, you get the platoon advantage against Gossman. He's kind of my favorite guy. Like, I don't mind doing a one-off of him because Stanton and Judge, who are obviously great plays, are going to be extremely highly owned. And I think Didi is the guy that could end up going overlooked here.
Yeah, I definitely like Gregorius as well. And like you said, we don't need to really rattle off the Judge and Stanton plays because they're going to be in play, most nights. I don't mind Brett Gardner here as well. I think he's interesting. I think he's also going to be a guy who is overlooked just because there is going to be so much of a focus on those other names. And you look at Gardner, decent pop, in Yankee Stadium, had a 189 ISO against right-handers last year. With that wind blowing out, with Gossman struggling against lefties, I think Gardner's interesting too.
Yeah, he really is. He has a little bit of speed, which definitely helps. If he gets on base and he has, Judge, Stanton, and Didi behind him, there's a decent chance he's going to get knocked in when one of those guys hits a home run. So I do like him. He's a decent value, I guess, semi-value option to get exposure to this offense that should score a decent amount of runs tonight.
Yep. Back half guys, I think Drury and Walker are interesting if you're kind of going with maybe a little bit of a Gregorius, Sanchez, Walker stack. I think that's kind of intriguing just given the fact that still Judge and Stanton are big strikeout guys. There are potential that they don't homer. And this offense is so deep that you could see something kind of like the Cubs last night where you get more of a back half production.
Yeah, I completely agree. I don't mind Walker here. He's a guy that I highlighted in the cheat sheets. He's been consistent with he hasn't actually posted a game where he didn't at least put up some fantasy points. He's hit safely in 3 straight games, has a couple RBIs over the last couple games. He's only struck out 3 times to start the season, so I do like him. Not a guy that has a ton of power, but given, again, the wind's going to be blowing out, he definitely could knock one out of the park tonight. Drury, a solid option. Tyler Wade, Tyler Austin, whoever gets in the lineup towards the bottom could be in play here.
Yep. Baltimore side of things, they're either going to put up a solid amount of runs or for some reason they're going to get maybe 5-6, bats against CC Sabathia where they just look awful. And we're we're all tilting another Baltimore stack against a weaker pitcher.
Yeah, for sure. I will say before we get into the hitters, Kevin Gossman last season did post some extreme splits with when it came to who was catching him. And his first appearance this season, it was Chance Cisco that caught him, not Caleb Joseph. When Joseph caught Gossman last season, Gossman was outstanding, had some really solid numbers. The Yankees are a team, they do strike out a decent amount. If you're building a bunch of lineups, you could get away with rolling out Gossman in like one or two tournament lineups. He does have a little bit of strikeout upside in this matchup, but that's as far as I'll go with that. On to the bats. I kind of highlighted the bats here as like a contrarian stack. I think the Yankees are going to contrarian / value stack. I think the Yankees are going to be the popular side of this game, but there's some interesting bats to get exposure here too. Jonathan Scope is a guy basically 289 ISO against lefties last season, decent amount of hard contact against them. I do like him. Caleb Joseph, who should be in the lineup today, extremely solid against left-handed pitching. He's a solid value option at catcher. Danny Valencia is a guy that I'm gonna stake my claim on as a home run call today. DraftKings, I don't know that I really want to get a ton of exposure to him because he's at third base where you're going to have guys like Donaldson, but he is that like platoon guy that comes in and he just kind of mashes lefties. And you and I were talking prior to recording. It's only 2 batted ball events because he's only had like 4 at bats this season. But in 2 batted ball events, his average exit velocity is almost 110 miles per hour this season. So I would be shocked if he doesn't knock one out of the park tonight.
Yeah, and look, I mean, last year against lefties, like, average exit velocity 89.4. This guy does match lefties. Does make a decent amount of contact, unlike some of these other bats. But I don't mind Valencia here. I think Trey Mancini's also interesting. He'll be a guy that I think is overlooked here. Should have had better numbers against lefties as far as the locometers say. But Mancini is a guy who did make contact a lot with lefties last year, just goes rather unlucky. And I think he'll be a little bit overlooked here. And then, like you said, I mean, you have Scope. I think Machado is interesting where you can play him at shortstop. And I think he's kind of rather underpriced here for tonight as well.
Yeah, he's extremely interesting. He's a guy, especially on DraftKings, where I can play him at shortstop. And if I'm not going to use Didi or if I can't afford Didi, like I feel pretty comfortable in locking Machado. Very low strikeout rate against left-handed pitching, decent power, 239 ISO, 44% hard contact dating back to last season. Excellent spot for him. Even some of these other guys like Adam Jones, not great numbers against lefties. He does have decent numbers against Sabathia in his career. Craig Gentry is going to be a value guy batting towards the bottom of that lineup. You could look at him. Anthony Santander, if he gets in the lineup, he's another value option that you could look at that's going to be batting towards the bottom of that lineup too.
Yep. So like you said, I mean, both these arms I think are like deep GPP plays.
Yeah, Sabathia, obviously a little bit of strikeout upside against an Orioles team that does strike out a whole lot this season.
Yeah, because like this projected line, I mean, still like 24% strikeout rate against lefties last year.
Yeah.
Cincinnati, Pittsburgh. This is another win game, but I'm still having a hard time kind of buying offenses in this park, and still with colder weather. I still have some interest in these pitchers, even with the wind blowing out.
Yeah, I have a little bit of interest in both pitchers, and I do have a little bit of interest in the Pittsburgh side of this game, starting with like Luis Castillo as a pitching option. Obviously, the wind's going to be blowing out. That is a little bit concerning. Castillo, a little bit of strikeout upside. I mean, he had 6 strikeouts against the Nationals in his very first time out. Did give up 6 earned runs, struggled a little bit with command. This is a offense in Pittsburgh that does not strike out a ton. They do make decent contact, but if you dig into some of their pitch numbers, they really, really struggle against guys that throw high velocity fastballs, which is what Castillo does. I think he's an interesting like GPP option on DraftKings tonight, 8,700. And I know on FanDuel he's 7,100. Probably doesn't make sense to get exposure there because all the pitching options are cheap there. But like as an SP2, he's very, very interesting.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you there. Like the guy does have solid stuff, has a decent strikeout rate, and also has an extremely high ground ball rate as well, which is something I'm looking at here tonight. Like you said, this Pittsburgh team doesn't strike out a ton. They have a few power bats in there, but none that I'm kind of really worried about. I think Castillo can get through this lineup here. Like you said, I think there is some strikeout upside. And I think a lot of people are going to pass over Pittsburgh and just go, maybe I don't see a ton of upside in this team, but I like Castillo here quite a bit. Like you said, SP2 playable. FanDuel, it's just so hard to choose anyone over McCullers, but I guess if you're trying to be different, building a bunch of lineups, like you can still use Castillo and a few GPPs.
Yeah, for sure. And if you are looking to get some exposure to these Pittsburgh bats, I do like Gregory Polanco. He's been outstanding to start the season. 6 hits, 6 games. Josh Bell has hit safely in all 6 games. Two guys that are solid options here. Even Colin Moran, who is an excellent value play tonight. Again, he's at a position, in third base where it's really tough to roll him out over some of the other guys that we're going to talk about. But he could be a power bat that you can get exposure to kind of differentiate your lineups.
Yeah, I agree there. Anyone else on Pittsburgh side that you like?
Not really. I mean, Corey Dickerson, maybe David Freese if he gets in the lineup. Another couple solid value bats, but they're not guys that I'm too heavily invested in tonight.
Yep. Reds against Trevor Williams here. Trevor Williams, I think, viable, cheaper SP2 here. Not a ton of upside, but a guy if you're kind of looking to get some bats in your lineup, like that's kind of how I see him being tonight.
He's an innings eater at this point. Like he doesn't have a ton of strikeout upside, decent ground ball rate, just shy of 50% dating back to last season. Doesn't give up a lot of hard contact, he does give up some to righties, but not a ton. Struggled with walks in his first outing against Detroit, but still tossed six hitless innings against a Reds team that is striking out a decent amount this season. And with Joey Votto really, really slumping, like this is a decent spot, I think, for Williams as an SP2 cash game option tonight.
Yeah, I think so too. Like you said, and you got to look. I mean, this Cincinnati lineup's going to have a ton of lefties in it, and that doesn't really necessarily worry me, just because that ground ball rate's still solid. Like you said, I mean, a lot of the hard contact was more against right-handed bats than it was lefties. I mean, lefties only 23% last year, so. Really, I mean, like you said, like Votto's a guy he's kind of the only bat that really does scare you. I mean, everyone else, like I know you got some power like Jeanette and Schebler, but everything else, like just a lot of guys that don't possess a ton of pop here. I'm a little bit into Williams here as an SP2 as the day goes on.
Yeah, I am too. And with the decent park, this is a solid pitcher's park, even with the wind blowing out about 10 miles per hour. It's still a decent pitcher's park. And I think, like I said, I think this is just a safe spot for him.
Yep. And like red bats, like, I mean, if you want to go, like, I think you can get like a contrarian Scooter Jeanette or Schebler or Votto here, but they're just kind of GPP plays.
Yeah, exactly. Jeanette, Suarez, those guys, guys I'm not really targeting, but if you want to get some exposure, feel free. I think Devin Mesoraco has some decent BVP against Williams if you're into that kind of thing, but it's just not for me.
Yeah. Moving on here, we're getting to some offense. Toronto and Texas. This one does need to be kept an eye on as far as weather goes. We got those Texas thunderstorms rolling in early, but I think this game is probably going to be more of a late start or maybe mid-inning delay, and then we kind of play this one out. But once again, I'm not a meteorologist. I can't handle the trolls on Twitter, so how could I be a meteorologist?
Yeah, exactly. Even like I don't necessarily think, even if there is like projected like in-game delays, I don't think it really matters, because you probably should not be looking at any of the pitchers from this game. Estrada, a guy gives up a ton of home runs. Matt Moore, not a very good pitcher, and with the wind gusting out at like 15 to 20 miles per hour, there's going to be a lot of home runs in this one.
Yeah, there is. And let's start with the road team here in Toronto, taking Matt Moore. They lost Holland and then basically replaced Holland with Matt Moore.
Woohoo!
So good job, Texas. But I love the right-handed bats here. You are going to get some value bats in this Toronto lineup. We talked a little bit about Steve Pearce, a guy with some big power against lefties. Projected to hit 5th here today. Obviously, if Morales gets in the lineup, Justin Smoke. Like, I love all these bats here for Toronto in this park.
Yeah, I pretty much like 1 through 9. Even a guy like Randall Grichuk, who I have not been on this season, is in play, and he's someone like I would cringe if I had to put him in my lineup, because I think there's better options over him. But Like starting off with Devin Travis, projected to bat leadoff. He's extremely cheap across the industry. He's solid against left-handed pitching, a 290 ISO against them dating back to last season, only striking out about 20% of the time. Josh Donaldson, 393 ISO, 44% hard contact. Pretty much just going to guarantee a home run from Donaldson in this spot. Justin Smoke, Kendrys Morales, Kevin Pillar, Steve Pearce, all of these guys, just excellent options. All are going to be extremely highly owned. But there's other like stacks you can be contrarian with. I think fading Toronto in the spot is trying to be contrarian, but actually being stupid.
Yeah, I think so too. Like, I think this game in general, like, it just best hitting environment on the board here, really, for these guys, especially with the wind blowing out and at all these prices. I mean, outside of Donaldson and Smoke, like, everyone else is really cheap, so it doesn't make kind of fitting Donaldson and Smoking that hard to do, especially over on FanDuel. Like, you're going to be able to fit in whoever you want, but yeah, all those bats very much in play. And even Texas side, like, against fly ball pitcher Estrada here. I'm finally looking for the Texas bats to break out here tonight. You and I have been targeting them with pitching basically night in and night out. That won't be the case here tonight.
No, it won't. And just real quick, a couple BVP plays for you BVP truthers. Russell Martin 3 for 9 with 2 homers and 6 ribbies against Moore. Kendrys Morales 3 for 5 with the home run versus Moore. But onto the Texas bats, Joey Gallo obviously headlining the offense here. Almost 36% strikeout rate, so there's a pretty good chance he's going to strike out probably 3 times, but he also has a 350 ISO against right-handed pitching. Does not bode well for Marco Estrada today. Great option here. Adrian Beltre, not a guy with a ton of pop recently, but you can get exposure to him. I really like Elvis Andrus and Shin Soo Chu. It's really tough to say that one fast, but 2 guys that I do have a lot of interest in from this Texas side of this game. Even Nomar Mazara and Robinson Chirinos, if he gets in the lineup. Chirinos, excellent value option. Decent amount of pop against right-handed pitching, 221 ISO against them last season. And Estrada gave up a decent amount of hard contact to right-handed hitters last season.
Yeah, I mean, sign me up for all these bats. And you mentioned Beltre here, and like, looking at him, I mean, Marco Estrada threw the changeup 30% of the time last year, and Beltre mashed changeups. The problem is, it's just like we've been kind of talking about this all pod so far, is like trying to get guys at third base over a Donaldson. It's hard to do. But on FanDuel, I mean, I think you can go with like a cheaper Beltre and use Donaldson in that util spot. It's interesting. And that's kind of why I like Sanchez too as my favorite guy, because catchers have tend to be lower owned on FanDuel throughout the start of the year, just with people feeling obligated to play, corner infield positions at the util spot or another outfielder. So you've been kind of getting catchers at lower owned on FanDuel, but Beltre, I think he's an interesting value because he really is underpriced across the industry and really hasn't done much like all these other Rangers bats so far.
Yeah, he did actually put up 2 hits, a run, and a double and a walk last game against Oakland. So maybe he's going to start to heat up. If you're playing like you mentioned on FanDuel or even Fantasy Draft or Yahoo has utility, I think. You can get some exposure there. Drew Robinson, cheap bat, probably going to bat towards the bottom of that lineup. Even Rougned Odor, still striking out a ton, but does have some pop against right-handed pitching.
Yeah, for sure. Chicago and Milwaukee. Chicago put a beat down on Milwaukee last night. We got Kyle Hendricks and Woodruff here. Woodruff, no interest here. I don't mind some Cubs bats, but is there any way that Cubs bats are contrarian tonight?
I think so, just because you obviously expect the Yankees and the Blue Jays to be the 2 top, targeted offenses, and then obviously the Astros are going to always garner ownership. So I think the Cubs could come in lower owned. I don't have a lot of interest in them. Woodruff, I think he's not a great pitcher, but I don't necessarily see them just going off on Woodruff tonight. I did highlight a couple of the Cubs, my favorite Cubs bats in the cheat sheets. I think Rizzo, Chris Bryant, Kyle Schwarber, even someone like Wilson Contreras, solid options, but none of these guys are guys that I just have a ton of interest in.
Yeah, I don't either. I think the most for me is probably Rizzo. He struggled a little bit to start the year here, but obviously good ballpark, which struggled with lefties last year. I think Hap's an interesting, GPP option. He's another guy who does strike out a ton, but obviously tremendous pop from the left side. Same with Schwarber. So it's kind of the three lefties here for me. You mentioned something about Hayward and his batted ball stats to me before the show, which is kind of interesting here in this ballpark and against Woodruff now. Like for that price, I kind of don't hate it now.
Yeah, I basically was talking about, when I pulled the average exit velocity of hitters so far with a minimum of 10 at-bats this season, Jason Hayward is fourth. 14 batted ball events, 97.4 average exit velocity. He went yard last night, if I recall correctly, and he did. He went one at bat. He went 1-for-1 with a homer, 2 RBIs. 3K over on DraftKings, not a terrible value option. So if you're wanting to get maybe a little bit of exposure, if he makes it in the lineup, you could look at him.
Yep. Milwaukee against Kyle Hendricks here. Hendricks, somewhat interesting. Once again, I feel like the Brewers are still a team to worry about. I don't love Hendricks here, but I think given the lack of options, I like him a little bit.
Given that there's not a lot of reliable pitching options in good environments, and I guess good is in quotations because this is still a hitter's park, but there's not one of the top end pitchers we're going to get to later is in a game that may get rained out, and then we have McCullers who we'll get to as well. But Hendricks feels like a solid cash game option. Obviously had a decent debut against Miami. He went 6 innings, gave up 1 earned run, 5 strikeouts. This is a Milwaukee team that does strike out a ton. His batted ball data looked solid opening in his first appearance. Average exit velocity 86.9 miles per hour, about 3 miles per hour over his average in 2017, but one game. Average distance only 93 feet, which is definitely solid. Last year against the Brewers. Actually, no, his career against the Brewers at Miller Park, 4-1, 2.31 ERA. Obviously, the team is a little bit different, but he feels like one of the safer options on the board today.
Yeah, definitely don't mind him here. There's definitely some strikeout upside. His numbers against lefties last year were solid, so don't have to worry. You do have to worry about obviously Shaw and Thames and Yelich and stuff, but given those numbers, you're a 24% strikeout rate against lefties last year. Decent stuff. I definitely don't mind him here. He's second to McCullers for me here on this slate, and there's a pretty steep drop off after that.
Yeah, it's pretty much how I would put it. Shaw, you did mention he does have some decent numbers against Hendricks, 4 for 12 with 2 homers. So we might get 1 earned run or 2 earned runs for Hendricks, but it feels like a spot where 6-7 strikeouts, probably go 6 innings. If you're playing on FanDuel, you could make a case for Hendricks over McCullers just because Hendricks tends to pitch deeper in games than McCullers does, which with the win being heavily valued over on FanDuel probably bodes well better for Hendricks than it does McCullers.
And probably actually get slightly lower ownership on Hendricks than McCullers because I think McCullers will definitely come in as the chalky arm on the day.
Yeah, he will.
So, any Milwaukee bats here if you're not targeting Hendricks? Shaw, but once again, third base is just a spot where I don't know if I can plug in Shaw over a Donaldson. I think Yelich and Thames are kind of interesting though.
Yeah, Thames is a little bit interesting. You mentioned Yelich as well. He's a little bit interesting. Hendricks did struggle against lefties a little bit, 1.21 homers per 9, 33.3% hard contact. Nothing staggering there, but I would target the lefties if you're going to do it.
San Diego and Houston here. Luis Perdomo taking on Lance McCullers, and we'll start with McCullers. He's the highest priced guy on DK. He's over 12K. They've been kind of doing that with slates this year. FanDuel, he's in the mid 8s. He's my favorite arm just because the strikeout upside here against the San Diego team it's phenomenal. Had a huge amount of strikeouts against Texas earlier this season. You toss that in, he's just got that perfect combo of ground ball rate and strikeout rate, which I love. And the fact that he's going up against a San Diego team at home just makes me love him even more.
Yeah, I wonder. I don't have any like evidence to back this up, but I do know like in NBA, whenever you have the questionable tag next to a player, it can sometimes lead to lower ownership. I wonder if like the day-to-day tag stays on McCullers on DraftKings and FanDuel throughout the afternoon. That's going to lower his ownership. That would be really, really awesome. Because this is just an amazing spot for him. You talked about the strikeout upside, struck out 10 batters in 5 1/3 against Texas, against a Padres team that is literally, if you just look at the names on the list, strikeout, 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 strikeout. Like that's just how they should just list it, because that's what's going to happen today. Probably going to strike out 9-10 against them tonight. No one on this team really hits McCullers' pitch type very well. Should lead to him putting up a solid game here.
Yeah, I think so. And, Will Myers, obviously that's a bigger bat out of the San Diego lineup. And even though he adds a decent amount of strikeout upside for opposing pitchers too, he's tossing in some other bats. I think Renfroe's the guy projected to slide into him, which, yikes.
Yeah, and it's kind of funny. Like the only guys that when I pulled the pitch numbers, one of the only guys that kind of hits knuckle curves with any kind of success is Chase Headley. And Headley's 0 for 7 with 5 strikeouts in his career against McCullers.
As a lot of people probably are.
Yeah, he's got some filthy stuff, and it baffles pretty much everybody.
Yeah, I don't have any, I don't even want to be contrarian with any San Diego bats here, do you?
No.
Houston side of things here. Perdomo's a decent guy. He's kind of tough to stack against because he has such a high ground ball rate. So I'm not terribly high in Houston. You can obviously use him. It's going to be the lefties here for me. I think again, I don't mind the Reddick and Gonzalez and McCanns and Fishers in the back half. That's kind of where I'm looking again.
Yeah, it is interesting. Perdomo did get knocked around a little bit in his first appearance, gave an average exit velocity of almost 95 miles per hour and an average distance of about 200 feet. Numbers that are vastly different from his averages last year of 87 and 132. Not gonna sit here and try to act like it's gonna continue. Given that it was only one sample size. If you want to stack Houston, go for it. I mean, it's still the Astros. They still have the ability to just go bananas here. You mentioned Reddick. He's a guy that I don't mind a one-off here. Excellent against ground ball pitchers, hitting the ball a little bit better recently. Marwin Gonzalez is a guy that I do have some interest in. He's got a little bit of pop there. You mentioned McCann. I think actually Gaddis is the catcher that I have the most interest in. He profiles against the pitch mix a little bit better. But I think mostly I'm just leaning towards Reddick or Marwin here.
Yeah, I think so. Digging deep, it's Gaddis or McCann are definitely GPP plays over on DraftKings. I won't look to use them on FanDuel. But yeah, like you said, that's kind of all I'm looking at just because they both do hit sinkers fairly well. Gaddis has more power against the sinkers with nearly 300 ISO against them last season.
Yeah, that's where I would lean, and you could get decent cheaper exposure to that back half. If you went with Reddick, Marwin, Gaddis, and then Fisher, who's just a cheap platoon bat.
Yep. Yeah, no interest in Perdomo here against this offense. So moving on, Oakland and LA. Daniel Gossett taking on Parker Bridwell. I don't have a ton of interest in either of these two arms. I kind of like the offenses more so here.
Yeah, I don't know if there's going to be a lot of ownership on either of these offenses, which might be a mistake because there's some decent bats on both sides of this game that I have a lot of interest in. And I think it was the Angels that I put in as one of my favorite contrarian stacks, which is kind of crazy whenever you have one of the best hitters in baseball, and Mike Trout being contrarian, but I think they may go overlooked here.
Yeah, I think so. They're the third stacking team in my article for today, and I kind of want to see as the season goes on. The other night with Harper being so popular against Tehran, with potentially the Yankees outfielding being so expensive here and so popular that maybe Trout just comes in lower owned now. He was 13% in the big $6 GPP on FanDuel the other night when Harper was 40%. If I'm going to start getting Trout at less than 20%, that's huge. Every time you can kind of bank on Trout being around that 25% mark. That was kind of his low point last year. So if other outfielders are kind of taking over and we're getting Trout at lower ownership, then that just further helps using Trout and the Angel stack here.
Yeah, and we're talking like the Daniel Gossett, who Trout is going up against, the Angels are going up against 37% hard contact to right-handed hitters last season, 2.4 home runs per nine. Like it's not a great home run park, especially for righties. Um, but I mean, you starting with Trout, excellent. I think he actually homered in this spot last time these teams faced off, and it was against Gossett. Zach Cozart, excellent option. Justin Upton, I put in the cheat sheets. He's probably going to strike out a ton, but he has a decent amount of pop. I love those guys. My favorite catcher option, if he gets in the lineup, is going to be Rene Rivera. He's pretty solid against right-handed pitching, 174 ISO, 27% strikeout rate, but he profiles extremely well against Gossett's pitch types.
Yeah, I like those calls right there. I'm all aboard. If Otani cracks the lineup, which we always have to, I haven't been really keeping track because I know they've been doing the scheduling with they play him 2 days in the field and then he pitches, and that's kind of it for the week for him. So he may actually be out. Given I think he pitches tomorrow, so he's probably actually not going to be in the lineup.
Yeah, I wouldn't expect him to be, but if he is, feel free to roll him out. I wonder what his ownership is going to be, given that he's gone yard in back-to-back games and went yard off Corey Kluber. Um, it will be interesting to see. I don't necessarily have a lot of interest in Otani or Valbuena at the bottom of that lineup. Even Calhoun, like if you want to get a one off of Calhoun, feel free. This is a decent home run. It should be a decent home run park throughout the season for left-handed hitters.
Yep, for sure. Oakland side of things here, definitely interesting. Not a Birdwell guy. I don't really look to use him even against Oakland. He's just a ton of hard contact to lefties last year. That's concerning against his Oakland team. I'm waiting for a big Oakland breakout, but I think this was going to be more of a one-off territory. I think Olsen, who I know you like as well, very much in play. I even don't hate Jed Lowry hitting third. He's okay.
Yeah, I'm mostly focusing on Matt Olson here as potentially a one-off. He had a 404 ISO and a 435 WOBA against right-handed pitching last season. Matt Joyce, just your typical platoon home run guy, against right-handed pitching, 248 ISO. Those are the two guys I have the most interest in. You mentioned Jed Lowry, just a solid bat at the top of that lineup. He hasn't shown like a ton of like power recently, even this season, but he's just consistently scoring. And he only has one game where he didn't actually score any fantasy points, but he has double-digit fantasy points in back-to-back games. Matt Chapman's been hitting really well. I don't necessarily want to target the righties against Bridwell, but you can definitely roll him out, and even Chris Davis.
Yeah, like Chris Davis, like I'm waiting for the big breakout game. Like hasn't had one since opening day. But outside that, like hasn't been great. But yeah, like I'm looking for the double dawn game is coming from Chris Davis at some point here, and I definitely want to be on it.
Yeah, it could happen tonight.
Yeah, very well could. But yeah, definitely a game of targets. Last game here, not really one that I'm looking at just because I don't know how weather's going to hold up, but also just because. How many runs were scored in that opening series? Like 3, 4 true runs.
It might have been 4.
Like actual, not off the air because it was 2 Joe Panic home runs.
Yeah, it wasn't very many.
And like I know like Derek Collins bad, and like I'm not a big Kenta Maeda guy here, but I still don't see a ton of offense tonight. And I'm really playing on this one to rain out. But I guess Dodgers bats are somewhat intriguing here.
Yeah, and it's kind of weird. Like, if I'm going to target Dodgers bats, I probably want to go with the lefties because Holland, 40% hard contact to left-handed hitters last season, 403 WOBA allowed. So, like, if I'm going these guys, I think Bellinger is interesting. Hoping he starts to heat up soon. Corey Seager, another interesting left-hander. Those are the two guys I have the most interest in. And like, if you wanted to sprinkle in Chris Taylor or Austin Barnes or Kike Hernandez, the typical platoon guy, feel free. But I don't have a ton of interest in the Dodgers bats today, even going against Derek Holland.
No, I don't either. It's just not a good ballpark for power. The weather is awful. I just don't see a ton of production. The same with like the Giants side. This is a team, I mean, they went off against Felix, and those lefties had a couple homers. Hell, even Hernandez got on the board there with the homer. But overall, this San Francisco team, like I'm still not thrilled with. I think Maeda can go out there and be a serviceable arm here tonight. Probably not a big upside play. I hate his price tag though. I absolutely hate it.
Yeah, I don't like his price tag, especially on DraftKings. But again, on a slate where outside of like McCullers, there's not a bunch of guys that you feel extremely comfortable in. He is at least a little bit interesting as like a tournament pivot, even a guy if you're wanting to stack like 2 high dollar pitchers in your lineup. I don't know why you'd want to do that, but you could. I put in the GCs, like I don't necessarily like picking on the Giants with pitchers, but Maeda's pitch profile does kind of work for him in this matchup. Like he was pretty aggressive attacking these lefties in the first matchup. I think Panic went yard off of him, but that was about it. I think you can look at him in the spots, and if for some reason they go righty heavy in that lineup, it makes Maeda an even better option, I think.
Yeah, because he was very good against right-handers last year, especially that strikeout rate.
Yeah, the strikeout rate, and I think it was his slider that he was throwing a ton, and he was generating like almost 22% swing strike rate. And pretty much all the righties, pretty much everyone in that lineup actually swings a lot at sliders.
Yep. That's it. Who do you got as your top home run guy on the board tonight?
Danny Valencia.
Contrarian?
That would be my contrarian. If I'm going, I don't think anyone's going to play Danny Valencia.
No, I don't think so either.
If I'm going chalk, Josh Donaldson.
I got Rizzo as my chalk. I don't know if he'll be chalk, but he's my more high name guy. As far as a lower guy, Randall Grichuk here. My guy. It's hard not to take some righty bats there for Toronto.
Yeah, it really is.
So that's it for us. You can go to DaveFantasyCafe.com. Brent on cheat sheets for today. Both articles will be up later as well. Still NBA going on if you're into that, which Godspeed if you are. But that's it for us. We'll be back Monday.
Good luck tonight.